Mr. Hellcat, the owner of the renowned YouTube channel Royal Muscle, known for its infamous content, found himself in an incident on June 4, 2021. He parked his vehicle in front of a pump at the Quick Trip gas station in Locust Grove, Georgia, and stepped out to make a phone call. Approximately 20 or 30 minutes later, Officer Pitts, Officer James, and Officer Mosley from the Locust Grove Police Department approached Mr. Hellcat to inquire about his activities related to the phrase, "Are you hanging?" Officer Pitts requests Mr. Hellcat to present his identification and implies that she wants to verify his residency in the neighborhood. It's important to note that Georgia does not have an Identify statute that legally obligates individuals to identify themselves to police during Terry stops. However, according to Georgia's loitering statute, specified in Section 161136 of the Georgia Code, officers have the authority to ask individuals suspected of loitering to identify themselves. The statute states that a person commits the offense of loitering or prowling when he is in a place at a time or in a manner not usual for law-abiding individuals under circumstances that warrant a justifiable and reasonable alarm or immediate concern for the safety of persons or property in the vicinity. A law enforcement officer shall, prior to any arrest, afford the person an opportunity to dispel any alarm or immediate concern which would otherwise be warranted by requesting the person to identify himself and explain his presence and conduct. Furthermore, the statute includes an individual's refusal to identify themselves as a factor that may contribute to determining whether there was a reasonable cause for alarm based on their behavior. However, it remains unclear whether a court would agree that Mr. Hellcat's actions warranted a justifiable and reasonable alarm or immediate concern for the safety of persons or property in the vicinity. In the 1995 case of Evans v. State, the Georgia Court of Appeals concluded that reasonable suspicion did exist. Officer Pitts attempted to explain Georgia's loitering law to Mr. Hellcat, but she failed to mention the requirements that the suspect's unusual behavior must reasonably alarm or immediately concern the safety of individuals or property. Anti-loitering laws, which criminalize being in a public space without an apparent reason, have a lengthy and contentious history in the United States. Broadly prohibiting all forms of loitering has generally been deemed unconstitutional. The origins of U.S. loitering law can be traced back to England's Poor Laws of the 1600s, which were established during an economic downturn to address the issue of large numbers of unemployed individuals roaming the streets. As briefly discussed in a previous episode of ATA, the Supreme Court made a significant ruling on the constitutionality of an anti-loitering law in the 1972 case of Papachristou v. City of Jacksonville. In declaring an anti-loitering statute that criminalized wandering or strolling without a lawful purpose or object to be overly broad and void for vagueness, the court held that the lack of standards governing the discretionary power granted by the ordinance allowed for arbitrary and discriminatory enforcement. It provided a convenient tool for local prosecuting officials to harshly and selectively enforce the law against specific groups they disapproved of, resulting in a system where the poor and unpopular could only stand on a public sidewalk at the whim of any police officer. Following the Papachristou decision, many loitering laws across the country were revised to include additional offenses associated with loitering, leading to the creation of Loitering Plus ordinances. Although some of these statutes have also been found unconstitutional, the Georgia Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of its loitering statute in the 1984 case of Bell v. State. The court concluded that the language used in the statute clearly outlined the prohibited conduct and prevented the possibility of arbitrary enforcement. Officer Pitts explains that Mr. Hellcat wasn't immediately placed in handcuffs because the officers wanted to give him an opportunity to dispel the alarm. This statement refers to the Georgia loitering statute, which states that before making an arrest, a law enforcement officer should, unless circumstances prevent it, allow the person a chance to clarify their identity, presence, and behavior to alleviate any justified concern or alarm. However, it's important to note that Mr. Hellcat wasn't legally obligated to dispel the officer's claimed alarm. As discussed in the Georgia Supreme Court case Bell v. State, where the constitutionality of the loitering statute was upheld, the statute doesn't mandate that a suspect provide information. Instead, it guarantees the person the opportunity to explain their actions, potentially alleviating the officer's safety concerns before any official action is taken. The court further clarified that the statute prevents a person from being convicted of loitering solely because they fail to satisfy the arresting officer's expectations regarding their explanation. Section B of the statute explicitly states, No person shall be convicted of an offense under this code section if it appears at trial that the explanation given by the person was true and would have dispelled the alarm or immediate concern. Consequently, if the officers had arrested Mr. Hellcat for loitering, a jury could still decide that the explanation he provided for his actions was reasonable enough to dispel the alleged concerns for the safety of individuals or property in the vicinity. The officers eventually departed without arresting Mr. Hellcat, allowing him to proceed with his day. 3 days following this incident, Officer Pitts was terminated from her position at the Locust Grove Police Department. It remains unclear whether Mr. Hellcat filed a complaint or intends to pursue legal action. We attempted to contact Locust Grove Police Chief Derek Austin, but he declined to comment on the featured episode's incident. This could be attributed to him being the third police chief appointed within the past 4 months, as the previous 2 chiefs were dismissed and incarcerated for embezzlement and tampering with evidence from the department. Chief Austin was not in charge at the time of this encounter. In general, the Locust Grove officers receive a C- rating because, while it can be argued that they were lawfully acting under Georgia's loitering code, they failed to adequately explain the statute to Mr. Hellcat. They maintained a demeanor of accusation and condescension throughout the interaction, and their decision to approach Mr. Hellcat was questionable at best. There exists a delicate balance between criminalizing innocent behavior and investigating unusual conduct. Officer Pitts initially stopped Mr. Hellcat on the basis that he had been in the parking lot for the same duration as the officers. By that logic, couldn't the officers be considered equally guilty of loitering? Regardless of their suspicions, the officer's explanation of Georgia's loitering law was incomplete and seemed intentionally vague, potentially to dissuade Mr. Hellcat's concerns regarding their conduct. There is no denying that the questionable conduct observed in this interaction can be attributed to the cryptic and ambiguous language of Georgia's loitering law. This interaction serves as a prime example of how the enforcement of loitering laws on the streets can be problematic, which is why they face strong opposition from constitutional scholars and legal professionals. Mr. Hellcat's performance in this encounter deserves an A-, because despite not invoking his right to remain silent, he remained composed and collected throughout. He calmly followed the officers' instructions, albeit with some reluctance, and respectfully questioned the legitimacy of their actions. It is emotionally challenging to be randomly approached and accused of criminal activity by law enforcement, particularly when one's actions are clearly innocent. Nevertheless, Mr. Hellcat maintained his composure and cooperated throughout the encounter. However, the officers from Locust Grove appear to interpret the presented facts in a way that assumed the potential for criminal activity, rather than accepting them at face value as innocent. This suggests a potential presence of confirmation bias, which is often discussed in relation to wrongful convictions. Confirmation bias occurs when individuals selectively seek, recall, weigh, or interpret information in a manner that supports their existing beliefs, expectations, or hypotheses. It can be argued that officers frequently experience confirmation bias due to their training and the effects of hypervigilance. Constant exposure to crime and a sense of potential danger may psychologically predispose individuals to adopt a more suspicious and accusatory mindset. Putting aside psychological theories, Mr. Hellcat handled himself well in this encounter, and it is plausible that his involvement played a role in Officer Pitt's termination, considering he managed to obtain the body camera footage from the incident. Thank you for watching our video, where we delved into the intricacies of police interactions, sorting out the who and what, and determining what's right and wrong. If you found this content informative and thought-provoking, we kindly ask you to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel.